Going live. All right, so it's about 11 a.m. We have a few people who've joined us already, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to everyone that's listening in today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Eden Ames with ARCO. I lead our creative team, and I am also the host of our new Innovative Locations webinar series. We started the series after recognizing we're fortunate to work with a wide variety of unique companies that are at the frontiers of entertainment, retail, and hospitality. So this is our first episode, and we're really excited to be welcoming our guest, Joe Vrankin. His career includes 20 plus years in various C-level roles, from CFO, COO, to CEO, primarily in the sports, leisure, and location-based entertainment sectors. And he's currently the CEO of the new interactive mini golf concept, Puttshack. It first opened in West London in June 2018, and due to their extraordinary growth, they're expanding to the U.S., and we, as ARCO, are really excited to be their design build partner as they're preparing to open doors this year in Atlanta, the Chicago suburbs, and Miami. So, Joe, let's go ahead and just jump in. Give us the history of Puttshack, the origins in the UK, and then where you kind of fall into that timeline and got plugged in to charter the growth to the U.S.
Sure. Ian, thanks for having me. Puttshack, I'm very fortunate to be involved. As you said, it started in the UK. The first location was in West London. And my connection there is the inventors of Puttshack are identical twin brothers out of the greater London area, Steve and Dave Jolliffe. And the three of us go all the way back to 2007, when they also are the inventors and the creators of Topgolf. And so one of my career experiences was the CEO of Topgolf for 5 years, and so we got to know each other well then. Over the past 7 years, they're incredibly creative, inventive guys. And so they stepped back and said, how can we reinvent the game of miniature golf and redesign it in a way that's targeted to a broad audience, but bring it into, current setting in the 21st century, as it were, right? So they put everything together, and really the basis around Puttshack is a smart golf ball. It's a smart ball that has incredible technology in it. It has a computer circuit, a battery, a GPS-enabled system. So it's essentially like a mini computer all encompassed within a golf ball. And then they created this really fun, engaging, compelling game that reinvents a traditional game of miniature golf in a whole new way. So they opened their first location in West London, and then they gave me a call after it had been open about 6 months. They were looking to roll it out not only across the United Kingdom, but also in the U.S., which is, really the largest market opportunity. And they asked if I'd get on a plane and go take a look at it. And as soon as I walked in, it was incredibly clear just how amazing this concept was, not only the product itself, but really encompassing everything around it, the energy, the vibe, the whole, it was really walking into just an unbelievable, high energy, fun, engaging place. Mm-hmm. And it was clear to me that this would work really anywhere in the world, but it'll definitely work in the United States. And so I joined in January 2019. We opened up 2 more locations in London in 2019 and are looking at rolling out across the United States.
That's awesome. So obviously Puttshack is very unique in that it's mini golf but interactive. Are there other elements that you see it really standing out from other entertainment concepts that exist? And what do you think that unique factor has to do with, the concept's growth so far?
Sure. So, when you look at experiential entertainment and what can create what's a differentiator, one of the key differentiator within Puttshack is the game itself. right? You can only get this experience at a Puttshack, right? You can play miniature golf anywhere, but you'll never be able to play it in the same way that you can get at Puttshack. And the holes are all designed to really hit what we consider our core demographic, which is that 21 to 39-year-old, right? So, you've got a beer pong hole, you have a trivia pursuit hole, a roulette hole. So they're designed to really be engaging to an adult audience, right? So that's one thing that makes it unique. The way the game is designed and the technology and the smart ball around it is, again, something you can't get anywhere else, right? So the other part is what we like to call really developing a triple threat. So the game is fun and engaging, and the reality is that was kind of handed to us as this incredible opportunity. And then it's building around it a really good food and beverage offering, right? And a great guest service experience. And what we've learned is if you can combine those three things, a fun, engaging game that people enjoy playing and want to play over and over again, and can combine it with really good food and beverage and taking really good care of your guest, that's what can differentiate us from other people in the space.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting to think about how you have to play with those elements when it comes to entertainment, the food and beverage, then the game itself. And then, given your experience too, I'm sure you've seen how that formula, so to speak, or the ratio of those things affects maybe the performance of the business. Do you feel like, is the game more important than the food and beverage? Is the food and beverage more important than the game? What do you think is the right blend there?
Yeah, that's a great question in putting together what I'll call the puzzle of what makes things work or not work as well. And having been in social entertainment space for a long time now, I've seen people really focus either on a game and then not a whole lot on the food and beverage side. So if I go back and I look at bowling as a concept for a while, it was really about the bowling, and then you got, like, at best, fast casual dining as a food offering, right? Or you have others where it's really focused on food and beverage, and then they kind of throw some activities in there to kind of add a little bit. What we've learned is really you have to have a strong focus on both, right? You have to have a great game that people want to come back and play over and over again, so that it's not a bucket list item. Oh, been there, done that, don't want to go back, right? And the Jolliffs are just phenomenal at creating that type of an experience.
Yeah.
Combine that with, the other co-founder, Adam Breeden, who really created the energy, the vibe, the excitement, right? So when you come in on a Friday night and you have a DJ and it's, and it's really hopping and there's high energy, you need to bring that component as the overall experience as well. But then you have to focus on really delivering a good food and beverage offering, right? We bring on, we have an executive chef, and all of our menu is a chef created. The creativity part is a huge aspect of it, right? Being trendy as far as what are the current trends within casual dining, and creating a superior casual dining experience. But then the other part is drinks have become an enormous focus and importance in kind of the overall experience of location-based entertainment and casual dining in general as well, right? So, you have to have this kind of mixology component that goes with it as well, of, where you would have a chef that would create these great food dishes. Well, now you also need to really be creating these, fun, engaging cocktails as well. And so if you don't focus on all of those, then, people will notice, and it will impact how successful you can be as a concept.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. It seems like novelty is really key because, you think about things like bowling or even, maybe mini golf to some extent without the interactivity. I think people tend to start to expect, they know what they're getting into, and it misses that novelty element where, you know, you go to a Puttshack, you might be surprised by what's new on the menu. Or I'm not sure if you guys, are you doing anything in terms of the courses too? You know, like sometimes you might see courses change. Can you talk a little bit about the interactivity adding to the novelty factor?
Sure. So I think the way we think about it is, how do we want to achieve a couple of things. We want Puttshack to be accessible to everybody, right? And the great thing about miniature golf is everybody knows how to play miniature golf from the time they're young, right? And so it's accessible to families, and it fits well as a family outing during the daytime, right? But the magic was creating a game that you played when you were young and continued to play as you became an adult, but it just wasn't this, you know, it didn't have the same compelling element. And so how do we essentially now create it for an adult environment, right? So it's accessible to everybody. The other is, how do we create the experience of more, right? More fun, more energy, more connection, and ultimately more memories for our guests.
Yeah.
Right. So part of what is important to achieve is that you have staying power as a brand, you have staying power as a concept, and we can utilize the technology to really tailor things to our guests, right? We can create the environment because it's a technology-based game.
Yeah.
We can create the environment where if you are coming with people and you really want it to be competitive, we can create a competitive game.
Yeah.
If you are coming with your family and you just want to have a leisure family experience, we can create that environment where the focus isn't on the competition, the focus is on just the pure fun of it, right? And the holes are also thought through as far as how to engage that both in creating just a fun environment, but also in ways that you can make it really competitive if that's the way you want to play the game.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. The digital aspect definitely opens all kinds of new doors to bringing novelty and, you know, changing your setting to fit who's coming through the doors. So back on track to growth, you know, what do you think it takes to bring a concept from another country to the U.S., and what have some of those milestones looked like for you and Puttshack specifically?
Sure. So it's a great question because I've had experience with this before in a past concept where the Jolliffs originally started Topgolf in the UK because that's where they're from. And obviously we brought that in, rolled that out successfully across the United States. But there's a lot of concepts that have tried to either come from here and go into Europe and have not done well, and vice versa. So part of it is recognizing, you know, what translates well, and then also understanding the cultural differences. Right now, for the most part, it's more straightforward. You know, when going from England to the U.S., we, in theory, speak the same language, although not entirely the same. And a lot of things translate well. Game-wise, what we've learned is that it translates well. If people like it there, right, what connects with people there connects well here. Okay. Now, there's other cultural differences that you need to be aware of. Food and beverage is very different in how it is viewed and consumed in the UK compared to what we look for in the US. How big a venue is and how much space there is. We like more space here.
Yeah. Right.
They're used to being much more in tighter quarters in London, right, and other parts of England, right? So understanding what our behavior differences, and that is a big part of it, and then understanding how the food and beverage component varies from market to market. And even within the United States, when you look at the US, there's things that work in Chicago that will work very differently on the food and beverage side in Dallas, as an example, right? So the good thing is a huge part of our core team are filled with people who have done it before. And a lot of them I've had the privilege of working with before. So I'd say half of our initial team today are people that I've worked with in the past. And so that is tremendously helpful in rolling out, because we already know each other, and a lot of them have done this before.
Sure.
Right, which is also a huge advantage. But we've really honed in on the things that we know are different, and in laying the foundation that we're starting with in the U.S. And so with our first site opening, as soon as we essentially hit the go button, our goal is to just start picking up momentum and open as quickly as we can, without getting out over our skis, as it were.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess I haven't thought of that difference even within the U.S. Just out of curiosity, I'm wondering how do you guys gain the insight as you're exploring new markets to enter? How do you determine what the appetite is? Maybe it's the food and beverage preference, maybe it's the space preference. What kind of exercises have you had to do to assess what market you're going into and what they want?
Sure. Well, in the U.S., we know we break our demographic down really into three groups. One is that 21 to 39 year old, which is what we call our core demographic. The next is our event groups, both social events as well as corporate events. And then the third group is families. Okay. So when we're looking at a market, so if I look at Chicago, all right, with a greater metropolitan area of 10 million people, clearly it's a market that can absorb multiple Puttshack locations. So when we look at a market, we then begin to hone in and say, okay, well, where are the guests that really come to visit the most, right? That are our core demographic, right? And fit those. And then we really hone in on what are the hotspot areas. And then as we identify those, then we look and say, okay, well, are there certain places you'd like to be as far as your first location within a market, right? Because if we're going to open 4 in Chicago as an example, right, then where do you want to be first, right? And so we really try to look at where do we think we're going to be the most successful. We really focus on the data that will tell us that. And we do the same thing as it relates to just markets across the country. We've, like many concepts, we've honed in on major markets initially, and we focused in on getting one in the north, one in the south, one out east, and one out west. Yeah. Because we want to establish that it's a national concept, and understand the nuances that may happen by region, from both seasonality of guest traffic to, food and beverage, nuances, et cetera. And then continue to build not only in major markets, but also then, go down to what I'll call, large mid-sized markets, like in Nashville, like in Austin, places that you would typically think about, so that we can establish just how many of these we can put across the U.S.
Yeah.
And with each one, then you're learning the nuances of those markets, right?
Yeah.
From not only food and beverage, but what's the music they like.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great point. So I know you kind of touched on this about deciding where to open those first few locations. If we can zoom in a little bit further into the site specific, selection, how did you pick, Oak Brook Terrace for the Chicago suburbs, or, where you guys are for Atlanta? I would love to hear a little bit about, picking the actual space.
Sure. So, we are very data driven in the way we look at site selection, right? Because at the end of the day, it's retail, and, as they say, it's location, location, location. Right? So when we looked at Chicago, we thought that there were 2 areas within Chicago that made sense for us to try to put our flag in the ground as our first Puttshack location. Okay, and the western suburbs was one of those, which is where Oak Brook is located. The Oak Brook Mall is a great outdoor lifestyle mall. It's, a top 20 revenue producing mall in the U.S. And the demographics in that area really fit well with the guest demographic that we're targeting, both from a walking guest as well as corporate events, etc.
Yeah.
Okay. So we also look at suburban versus urban locations. Okay. And Atlanta in West Midtown is more of an urban location for us, where Oak Brook is more of a suburban location for us. But it's the same kind of analysis that we go through. Right now, we literally create scorecards as far as where do we think will work. And so Atlanta's West Midtown is a great hotspot area, right? It's growing. It's only becoming more and more popular. We ideally will be more focused on urban locations versus suburban locations, right? And while there's tons of mall space available, malls aren't necessarily the place we want to be as far as putting a Puttshack, because you want a hot spot area. You want to be in a place where people think about spending their evenings or weekends.
Yeah.
Oak Brook fits that bill very well. They have a lot of nightlife, nighttime activity that goes on. And West Midtown Atlanta fits that well. And then, we're going to open Miami and Brickell City Center after those two. That's our third location. Mm-hmm. And that's a hotspot area that kind of combines an urban location with a lifestyle mall environment right in the heart of downtown Miami.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. So now to the unavoidable question. And in what ways do you think Puttshack has been weathering the storm of COVID? What's been your insight watching how the shutdowns have affected the UK locations?
Yeah. So, like everybody within hospitality, it's been an incredibly difficult window. I'm really proud of our team in how we've managed through it and how we're coming out the other side. Like everybody, we were forced to close down our 3 London locations. We were able to reopen in August, and we got a phenomenal response. I mean, we in one of our locations, we were doing essentially the same revenue numbers as we were doing the prior year in August, and in the other location, we were actually up year on year. So within our space, that was absolutely unheard of. Mm-hmm. And I think a combination of it was, kind of goes back to what we originally talked about, is the compelling part of the game and how great it is. And then the other is, I think, really honing in and saying, okay, well, how do you put COVID protocols in place that the guests feel safe and secure when they're coming and playing? And for us, part of the technology creates an inherent advantage of doing that, because we can space people apart within the game, and that naturally is part of what we can do with the technology. Mm-hmm. So we can create that environment that people are able to relax in, even within kind of an environment that nobody would have seen a year ago.
Yeah. I'm realizing there's a question more based on locations. It's probably more related to what we were talking about just before this, about assessing competition, I guess, when you're looking for sites. You're talking about Oak Brook Terrace is one of the examples where a lot of people go there for nightlife. I'm curious also about how you decide whether there's space for Puttshack. Do you go to the hubs for nightlife? Do you make an assessment of like, oh, there's already this, there's already that, maybe that's not going to be a good fit? Does that go into any of the decision making?
Actually, we like to be somewhere where there is a lot of other activities going on. Okay, mm-hmm. As we would say, a hotspot area already. Okay, and the reason for that, in what we've learned over time within kind of the way people make their decisions of where they're going to go and spend their leisure money, a lot of times people will think of an area, right? Yeah. And they'll say, okay, well, there's 5 or 6 things to do over, using Oak Brook as the example, mm-hmm. right? There's casual dining, there's fine dining, there's other location-based entertainment, there's movie theaters. What do you want to do tonight, right? Yeah. And so people will think of that area, and then they'll think of all the things that they can do in that area. Mm-hmm. Right? So we want to be where there's a lot of things going on. And then we just want to be as part of that consideration set that people are thinking about.
Yeah.
right? So when they're thinking about what do we want to do tonight, we know they're not every time going to go, oh, well, let's go to Puttshack. Although that'd be great, the practical reality is that's not what people want to do or people are going to do.
Right.
And that's okay. We just want to be in that decision set, because if we are delivering our triple threat, the game, the food and beverage, and our guest service level to our expectations and taking care of them, we're confident that they're going to come 3-4 times a year. Mm-hmm. And if they do, then that's perfect for us.
Yeah.
Right. And if they decide to go to the movie theater that night, that's fine. As long as we're in that consideration set, we're confident that we'll win them over enough times every year, and they'll keep coming back because it's fun.
Yeah. That's great. So back to the pandemic. Obviously, it's changed a lot of things. I'm wondering specifically as you're getting ready to open new locations, I'm sure projections have changed and the expectations for growth have maybe changed a bit. What do you hope for in terms of growth once the doors open at Atlanta, Oak Brook, and Miami this year?
Sure. So, I mean, we like everybody else, we've had some impact. Okay. So for us, the biggest impact in the States was delay of starting construction and opening of our first U.S. locations. Okay. Atlanta actually is not that far off. We were anticipating opening in February. It'll be a couple of months later. Oak Brook, on the other hand, we were hoping to have already had open, and it'll open later this year, right? But those are what I'll call just kind of short-term impacts, right? Because they'll kind of work their way out with the schedule. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a weather delay. It delayed you, but it's not going to have a major impact.
Yeah.
And so for us, there's actually some positive things that came out from the pandemic side, which is that it's created more opportunities for us in site selection, location, and the real estate side of the overall business. And so in building our pipeline, what we're actually going to find is that we will open a little bit later than we wanted to, but we are actually building a more robust pipeline for quicker growth over the next 24 months.
That's great. So then kind of zooming out to the location-based sector, entertainment specifically, do you think that the pandemic is going to have any sort of long-standing impact, or how do you think it's going to shift that particular sector for entertainment?
Yeah. So I don't think you'll be surprised to hear that I'm actually very bullish on location-based entertainment coming out of the pandemic. Okay. And I had a theory, during part of it, which we seem to be panning out as far as some confirmation of that when we reopened in London, right? So we're currently in what will hopefully be the last lockdown in London, mm-hmm. but we had a 3-month window where we were reopened, right? And the question was, will people go back to an indoor environment? Will they come back? Will they be coming back in the same volume, et cetera?
Right.
And I think part of my belief was that as much as anything coming out of the pandemic, people are going to be more attracted to location-based entertainment. And the reason is, I think generally speaking, we like location-based entertainment. We like the connections that are involved with it. But we always took it for granted. We could do it whenever we wanted. Mm-hmm. What the pandemic really highlighted is the value and how special connections with people really are when we lost them.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So what we were seeing when we reopened in London is how much value people were putting on that, right? And mm-hmm. so when they were going out, they wanted to be an environment where they were with people they were close to, whether that be family or friends. They were engaged in an activity, right, along with eating and drinking, where they were really creating that, that connection time, yeah. the memories that you really hope to get when you go out and do something special. And so My belief is actually our space is going to see a resurgence on a post-pandemic environment because people are going to really want to be engaged in things that they are actively involved in and that will create those connections with the people that they're out with.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just reading, I think, a headline this morning about how even the most mundane things, like going out and grocery shopping, can almost invigorate that sense of, I'm going to do something that we've all been starved of. Yeah. So
if you look back, I mean, the closest thing we have to look back in history is 100 years ago, when the last time we had, a global pandemic with the Spanish flu.
Right.
And coming out of that led to the Roaring 20s in the U.S.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm interested to see if there's any studies out there on that correlation. There likely is. It's a good point. So moving on to the next question, what do you think are the biggest risks involved for food and beverage concepts and location-based entertainment? Just in general, obviously, we have this risk of the pandemic that kind of came out of nowhere, but once things maybe return to some level of normalcy, in your mind, what do you think are the biggest hurdles and obstacles?
Sure. Well, I think part is as we get to the back, hopefully third quarter or tail end of the pandemic, right? It's how each individual concept transitions out of it, right? Mm-hmm. So are you creating that environment where people are going to feel comfortable and safe coming into your concept?
Yeah.
Right. Until we get to a place where what I'll say, the pandemic and all of the worries about it are truly in the rearview mirror. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's part of it. The risk, I think, in our space in general, which really is not related to the pandemic at all. It's, do you have engaging activity that people want to do multiple times, that they will keep coming back to, right? And then looking at the economics of what the concept is, how much of your revenue can you generate from the game or activity, and how does that balance within the food and beverage side, mm-hmm. right? So to me, part of the real strength of what we have at Puttshack is how well we balance the game and the food and beverage side, right? And there's a lot of concepts that are out there that if you don't have a hugely compelling activity, or it makes up a small percentage of the revenue, then you're at risk of the same things that will impact a bar or restaurant.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And the more that you can create a blend of all of it, it's not only what I believe is the greatest strength of what a concept can be, but it also gives you the greatest strength to work through the challenges that inevitably come. Right? I mean, we live in a world where there's cycles of one sort or another, and sometimes we get hit with, events that are really significant. But the reality is, sometime over the next window of time, you're going to have a recession. Why? Because you don't know when, but it's predictable that it'll happen.
Right.
And you want your business to be able to weather those kind of things and then come out the other end and continue to grow.
Yeah. So to zoom in there, in terms of protecting yourself from those risks, like a recession or like a pandemic, for Puttshack specifically, how do you see that food and beverage and game mix doing that? Like, do you see yourself emphasizing one more than the other in certain circumstances and vice versa?
Sure. So, listen, when times are good, right, the site economics of a Puttshack work incredibly well. In a somewhat ironic way, and it sometimes actually can work even better in a challenging environment. Okay? And what I mean by that is, naturally, anybody who's in this space, your margins are going to be better on the game side than they are on food and beverage. Okay? So that's part of the strength of having location-based entertainment. When we reopened in London, what we found is we had a bunch of food and beverage restrictions. So we had to work within that environment. And then we had to have distancing. We had to space people apart in the game side further. But we were able to perform so well because what we found is people changed their behavior and they would come earlier in the day, right? So essentially our busy/peak time, that window expanded on the weekends to a larger window of time. So we were ultimately still putting through about the same number of people who were playing the game.
Yeah.
But because of the restrictions, we were seeing less spend per visitor on the food and beverage side. But that was okay because we're able to blend the margins of the two businesses and do really well.
Yeah.
Where if we were a straight restaurant, you're struggling to do that because you have to have enough people going through.
Right. Yeah. So from your perspective, what do you think makes one concept succeed and another one fail? I know we've touched a little bit on some of these insights, but maybe in a more black and white sense, what do you think?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think one of the huge things is the activity has to be unique and compelling and fun where people are going to come back over and over, right? If they can get it just anywhere, then you really don't have a differentiator, right? And so one of the great things about Puttshack is not only the game, but there's, we have patents around our game. So the reality is the only place you're going to get that game experience in the way that it was created and designed is through a Puttshack. And the other things, you can make a misstep on the food and beverage side, but you can fix that, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have a compelling experience activity that you're doing that people want to come back and do over and over again, then your biggest risk there is either you become a fad, right? Or people just will go once and they just won't come back.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it is pretty rare to see what I know we have in Puttshack, having seen things for the past 20 years, right? For me, it's pretty clear that not only we have something that's really compelling today, but based on the way it's all designed around technology, we can continue to always make it better.
Right. And
make it fun and make it new for people.
Yeah.
So not everybody has that advantage.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier, where something might become trite once it's familiar and you have a lot of access to the same thing. So just the last question, what knowledge would you want to impart to entrepreneurs within this space?
Yeah, well, one, you're going to need perseverance because as long as I've been doing this, there's a few things I've learned. One, you can do as much planning as you want, and you can do as much, good strategy work, but things will happen that you can't predict.
Yeah.
And I can't think of a better example than the pandemic right now, but, businesses were sidetracked dramatically after 9/11. They were sidetracked dramatically after the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. Right, so there are things that happen that you are not part of your plan that you have to be prepared for, and you're going to have to persevere through the challenges that go with that.
Right.
Right. The other is always be looking at how you can be better. And part of the best way to do that is to never stop learning, right? I think one of the biggest risks that entrepreneurs have, and I've made this mistake in my career, is things start going really well, and I can start to think that it was really me that did that. And the reality is remaining humble and understanding that that's not really me. Right? I am surrounded by really great people, and I have this great concept, and it's my job to continue to learn as much as I can.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's too many things that can happen for you to learn everything. Right? So learn as much as you can from other people.
Right.
And avoid mistakes that you see other people make, and learn from that, as opposed to the hard way. As I heard somebody say once, wisdom is one of those things you get about 5 minutes after you really needed it.
Yep.
And for an entrepreneur, that's very true, because we learn a lot through our mistakes. but we can learn a lot from watching other people's mistakes and how to avoid them, and watch what other people do well and how to replicate it.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you so much for going through those questions. We have a couple that have come from the audience, so I'll go ahead and ask those now. And if anybody's listening and they want to type something into the live chat, we can do that too. The first question that came from an audience member is, how do location-based entertainment concepts get people to socialize again in a normal sense?
Well, inherently, you've got an activity that's involved with it, right? So I think people are going to crave social opportunities,
Yeah.
right? I did see this study going back to the 70s in recessions where when people are in difficult times, the things that do the best is when they're actively involved. The things that have the biggest negative impact are when they're passively involved. So watching a sporting event, going to a baseball game, is not nearly as kind of recover as quickly as things that you are actively involved in. And I think for those of us who are in location-based entertainment, we have an activity. Our kind of goal is to, how do we really create it and deliver it in a way that our guests are going to want to be socializing and making the connections that they've been missing for the last year.
That's interesting about being actively involved being a key point. So then this came from the same audience member. How do location-based entertainment concepts with games that have touch points work in a post-COVID world? I think we've seen a lot of mitigation. Do you think those things stay in terms of, sanitizing after every use and all of that? What do you think the longevity, I guess, is of those additional hygiene practices?
Yeah, I think a lot of those are going to be here to stay, right? I think human nature is you want it to go back to as close to what it was before as you can, right? That's just kind of seems to be the way we're wired, right? And with that said, there's some things that you permanently change in how you do things, right? And we've seen that kind of happen throughout history over a lot of major events, right? So I think we're going to have some things that are health and safety related that are going to be part of what happens going forward, although that will kind of get closer and closer to what it was before. I tend to focus, not surprisingly, on what do we need to do, right? What do we need to do to make sure that people are comfortable within a Puttshack environment? How do we make sure that we have sanitized our golf balls, sanitized our golf clubs, right? How we use technology to create social distancing that we need based on wherever we're at a particular, point in time. And so we've focused heavily on how to do those things that are what I'll call more of a manual process, and how we can integrate that within our technology and our software programming and everything else, in how we deliver the game execution. Yeah,
that's great. This was from another audience member. How do you think about whether you are converting consumers away from existing concepts versus creating incremental experiential demand? I think this question might be about cannibalization.
Yep. My view is that there's a lot of opportunity in experiential entertainment. And so I don't view a Puttshack or other concepts really cannibalizing the market per se. I think it's actually expanding the pie. Okay. Now, with that said, over the last 10 years, there have been new, location-based entertainment that's come along. And so what it does put pressure on is that everybody has to be on their A game, as we say, right? When you're an associate and you come to Puttshack, bring your A game, right? And the reality is, I think there was a window when there wasn't a lot of competition where you could not necessarily bring your A game and you could still do well. I don't think that's the case, kind of as you look forward within this space. But I think there is plenty of room and plenty of consumer demand for location-based entertainment today and I think for years to come.
Yeah. And this one just came from our live chat. Shelton asks, how did you raise money for expansion from one store? Any pros and cons?
Yeah, the art of raising money. Sheldon, well, I've been involved with that for 20 years, and with the growth concept, you feel like you're involved in that more than you would like to be, because you really want to focus on the growth of the business, but you have to have the fuel that's going to allow that expansion. So, once you open a test, your beta location, your first location, and you learn from it, the reality is you have to get out there and find people who believe in your vision, who have the ability to, fund some expansion for you. And then it's really a question of, there's a bunch of different ways of how aggressively you want to do that, or how slowly you want to do that. And there's a lot of different reasons for doing it in different ways. Mm-hmm. But what you need to do, my experience is, you have to find investors who are believers in the same way you're a believer.
Yeah.
And if you do, then you really started a path of how you can grow the business and support it financially.
Yeah, that's great. So those are all the questions from our audience today. I just want to thank everyone for tuning in, and thank you especially, Joe, for making time for this conversation. It's been really insightful for me, and hopefully to everybody else listening.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Well, thank you again, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.
Thanks, Eden.
Thanks. Bye.